All right, welcome back to another Tech Talk. This is your man Josh from KeepItTechie, and today I have another special guest in the building. It's Kelsey Hightower. He's actually a Google developer advocate, and I wanted to bring him in so he can just give us his take on getting into the IT field and also, just share his experience, working for different companies. I have a story and I've told my story plenty of times on my channel. Just try to inspire people to get into the IT field or, give them some advice or help, that can, just help them decide what area of IT they want to get into. And so I wanted to do the same thing by bringing Kelsey on today, and I'm happy to have him. How you doing, Kelsey?
I'm doing well. It's Saturday, internet's working, so I know the world's still going, so that's my litmus test.
Yeah, definitely. Hello to everyone. Let me go down and give a couple of shout outs right fast to everybody that's in the building. Zakiba, good to see you. I'm glad you always the first one here, so good to see you. Gold Professor, good to see you. Peace. Um, um, James Foreman, good to see you. Fabian, good to see you, man. Yeah, you've been following me for a long time. Red Venus, good to see you. Professor Black Ops in the building. James, I see you. Lordo211, hello, how you doing? So that's shout out to all you guys. I'm happy you guys were able to come through for this. But let's start off, Kelsey, by I just wanted you to. I typically start off by allowing you to introduce yourself as well as give a little bit about your background and how you got into IT.
Yeah, so I'm one of those self-proclaimed, self-taught engineers. Went to the bookstore, bought books on Linux system administration. Python was my first programming language, so this is back in like 1999, 2000.
Wow.
I got into the tech game by studying for the A+ certification. So no college courses, but I still go back and think about all those people who put together those kind of intro to system administration, A+ certification guides as kind of my teachers that I've never met. So even though I say self-taught, I'm kind of making a reference to kind of self-motivated. And then from there, there's a long history you can read about in many places, but I opened a computer store because I didn't necessarily feel comfortable and necessarily I didn't have the skills. So I ended up just opening a small business, doing things like service calls, break fixing people's PCs. And then I would just have this career around early on, these 3 month to permanent jobs where you're going in system administration, you're working overnight in a knock, financial services, all kind of industries. Until I get to the point where I start to get the right type of skills where I can really make an impact over a couple year period. And then I started to get into open source. And I think a lot of people know me from some of the open source work at Puppet Labs, in the cloud,
Hmm.
Kubernetes, containers. And you mix in a bit of public speaking and you kind of get the person that I am today. So, this engineer who can communicate well, but loves participating in these communities, no matter what company I work at or what products that I'm working on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting right there, man. And it's also, very, inspiring for you to, say was self-taught. You went out and actually, learn this stuff on your own. And that's one of the things I try to push to the people that come through here. That a lot of this information is out here. You don't necessarily have to go to a college or some standardized, institution in order to get into the IT field. You can learn a lot of this stuff on your own. And that's one of the reasons I do these videos and talk about this stuff on my channel, to try to point people to the direction where you can go to actually learn this stuff, on your own. So that's super inspiring, and
And
glad.
Josh, the
Go
truth of
ahead.
it is, even if you do go to college,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to continuously learn this stuff. There is no,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
I got this degree in 87 and I'm good to go, right? A lot of the technologies we talk about these days and use in industry were not invented in
Mm-hmm.
87. So this kind of self-taught, I think is really a requirement to be
Mm-hmm.
in tech long term. So no matter what path that you jump into tech, there's always going to be this necessary need to be self motivated to the point where you're willing to um, consume information outside of a structured classroom. So no matter what your path is, I think all of us at some point on some technology have to take that self-taught route in order to stay current.
Nah, and I 100% agree with you, man. That's I'm so glad you brought. I mean, you said that. You know, that's ex- spot on. You know what I'm saying? You spot on with that because and I've experienced that myself. And that's why I say it's spot on because um I got a degree, a bachelor's degree back in what was this 2005 is when I finished it. But um all that stuff is irrelevant. I've had to continuously learn in order to progress in my career. So I 100% agree with you. So
Yeah, I actually see a question in the chat. I think it's
mhm.
from JM
Go ahead.
Romero. He's like, "Hey, I'm a techie. I passed my CompTIA A plus. Like that's where I started in tech as well.
Hmm.
MTA server, but I flunked the Linux essentials. Do I still have a future in IT? I don't like Linux too much." Well, I think the kind of answer to that is there's going to be tech is really big. I think we always kind of focus on programming or system administration,
Hmm.
DevOps, cloud, those type of things. But there are other roles, QA, product management, UX design, front end design, back end design. I think to think about Linux as part of your early journey, it's your opportunity to learn how operating systems work. Is it an absolute requirement? Probably not. But I think when you're in that learning phase, really getting deep on at least one operating system, whether it be Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. But I think the thing about Linux is that in the cloud, most enterprises, Linux is kind of the enterprise standard for building modern backends. So, and a lot of entry level jobs, or if you're new to tech, a lot of opportunities will be at that level where you can come in, manage systems. Some people are moving to the cloud for the first time, where Linux is heavily favored in terms of an operating system. So it's less about do you have to like it, but I think you have to ask yourself what type of role do you want to play in tech, and based on that, if Linux becomes a requirement, it's something you're probably going to have to skill up on. There's a ton of technologies that I actually don't like, but you know what? I tend to learn them anyway, especially if they play a huge role in my job function or the industry that I'm participating in.
Exactly. I agree. I agree. Um, yeah, it's and that's one of the reasons I guess I got into speaking about Linux, and open source, and it's starting to be well, it's been around on the back end side, like you were talking about. It's been around. It's like an industry standard. But most front end stuff is typically Windows, or not really front end, but the applications or the operating system that most people uses or most organizations use is Windows front end. But yeah, Linux is important to learn. And I try to push it. That's why I guess I'm kind of like an advocate for Linux, so to speak, where I'm always pushing open source technology. So, um, but
Yeah, I think
no,
that
go ahead.
open source point is pretty important. For people that may be new, I see some people in the comments are fairly new, and it's like, why do people keep talking about open source? Why is Linux so important? Why has that become the go-to thing when people are learning? Number one, it's accessible, right? You literally can download a Linux distribution for free, install it on a spare machine or in a VM on your existing machine, and really dig into the details, right? The source code is available if you're into that side of things. You want to see how operating systems are built. The communities are transparent, right?
Hmm.
You can go into the Linux mailing list and literally interact with the people who create this operating system, patch the security vulnerabilities, and you can go back in history and look at those previous conversations where people were making decisions about how that operating system should function. So that level of transparency, the ability to review the source code if you're into that, and I think also the ability to interact with this community. Everyone's at a different level. Some people are going to be first day just like you. You're going to have some people who've been doing it for 20, 30 years that you can lean on. So I
Hmm.
think whenever you kind of get into tech or any learning path, whether you want to be a plumber or a carpenter, it typically helps to be around people who've done it before, kind of in this kind of an apprenticeship mode. So this is why I think open source should be critical to anyone's continuous learning journey. And this is why we talk about it so much. And I think there was a comment here that said, is Linux hard to learn? It probably is. Anything is hard to learn for the very first time, right? If you walk into a airplane and someone asks you to fly it right now, you probably wouldn't do very well, and you probably wouldn't like it because most people want results when they go do something. So the question is, why are you learning Linux? Why are you learning how to fly a plane? Do you want to be a pilot? If you want to be a pilot, then you have to learn how to fly the plane. If you just want to be a passenger on a plane, then yeah, maybe you don't need to learn how to fly an actual plane. You might want to know a little bit about how some planes work, but you may not need to. So the question is, why do you want to learn Linux? Is there a profession you want to get in where that will be beneficial? And you're going to make a ton of decisions around what skills to learn because there's so much out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad you used that analogy. That kind of explained it a little more to me. As far as like back end development, front end development. Do you want to fly the plane or be a passenger? So that was a great analogy. Um, Now it was another thing I did see that well, no, let's I'm gonna ask the questions a little later. But if you see something, feel free to respond to it if you want to. But let me get to this thing. If someone was trying to get into the IT field, where do you think they should start at this? Because things change all the time, and it's changing, constantly changing now. What are your thoughts? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question you got to ask is like, why do you want to get in IT? And some
Hmm.
valid answers include, I want to make some money,
Yeah.
right? The field pays well. I heard you don't have to necessarily have a college degree to get started. And those are valid reasons to want to do the work, acquire the skill set to join this profession. And again, there's so many roles. So
Hmm.
when people say they want to get in IT, well, sometimes you want to start at, Best Buy, working in the Geek Squad, learning how to communicate with customers, troubleshooting their issues and resolving those issues. That is a valid place to start. I
Hmm.
have some people, they just want to start strictly at, senior software engineer making $200,000 and $300,000 a year on day one. That may not be reasonable for everybody.
Yeah.
It might be something you can do. I don't want to discourage anyone, but just to be realistic, when you look at your entry point into tech, I think anytime you can acquire real world skills and develop the appetite to want to solve problems, and then you can ask yourself, what type of role would you like to play in that? For example, maybe you worked at Walmart for 5 years at a cash register, right? So you kind of know the pain of checking people out. You know what could go wrong. You know how to speed up the process. Maybe you know tricks about how to streamline that end to end flow to do a really good job. Okay, great. So now you have some work experience. You kind of know what's required in terms of discipline. But you might look at that and say, you know what? I want to build a better cash register, or maybe I want to go work at Walmart Technologies where they build and automate self checkout. And
Hmm.
so, someone with a background and experience in almost any industry can carry those skills over into their tech skills. So let's say you go and get this job at Walmart Technologies. Now, you might want to be the person who keeps those systems online. So maybe you start with system administration or tech support. When the cash registers break, do you want to take that call and tell people how to troubleshoot it? Or do you want to be the type of person who builds those systems?
Hmm.
You have to decide, you know, it's not a permanent choice, by the way. You might want to work on the user experience of the UI. So maybe you want to get into web development or mobile development. But I think the entry point needs to be, what type of activities do I enjoy?
Hmm.
And then you ask yourself, what type of skills are required in order to do those activities? And that should be your first path in tech. And don't be worried about, necessarily starting in QA or a call center where you're just taking a phone call. You got to start somewhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to be ending or or you're going to get stuck.
No, I agree, man. It's um a lot of times, you know what I'm saying, you have to, work yourself up and start, at a specific level, and then I agree with you what you were saying about you never know where you're gonna end up as well. There's something I say all the time. You can start in one area, and I use myself as an example. I've done the systems administration work, and then now I'm doing database administration work, which is totally different. I mean, the systems information, though, the systems administration work actually really helped me a lot with that once I got into this whole database administration role. So you constantly carrying those skills forward as well and using them, you know throughout your career, so it's a benefit. So you never know where you're gonna start. It's really just getting into it and starting. So I agree with you there. Yep. Yep. um Now, if you guys didn't know, I have Kelsey Hightower in the building. He works for Google, and I just want to give you guys a update for all the new people that's coming in. And let me give a couple shout outs again. Maddox, good to see you. And Elkston, I think I haven't seen you before, but Candy James, good to see you as well. And if you guys got any questions, just drop them in the chat. I'll try to, if anything is missed, I'll try to ask them. I'm writing them down as we go, but try to ask in the end. But if he wants to respond, you can, Kelsey, to anything you see you want to respond to. But let me ask you this next question I typically ask. So you brought up that you constantly have to learn new things. Um, how do you keep your technology skills open or current? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you know what I'm doing? I'm going to combine that with this question that I see in the chat, which is how is it at Google?
Okay.
And I think I've been at Google for almost 6 years, and I joined in Google Cloud. And there's so many products we have in Google Cloud now, from data analytics to things like BigQuery, machine learning, things like TensorFlow, containerization, like Kubernetes, and then we have all of our serverless stuff. And in each of those areas, you can go super deep. Typically, they all have something to do with networking and security. And so
Mm-hmm.
at some point in my career, I started to try to create this pyramid. So when I first started out, I tried to make sure that I was learning pretty much everything I can. I would look at a job posting. If they want Linux, Python, Perl, PHP, I would try to learn those things to acquire that particular job. And usually from company to company, there will always be a slightly different mix of technologies that, depending on your ability to ramp up on those things, you're going to be able to make an impact, right? Sometimes you can introduce new technologies when it makes sense. But what I used to do early in my career, I would just learn what those various companies were doing just to make sure I could broaden my own exposure to those new technologies. What I've learned is that that never stops, no matter where you go. For example, how's it at Google? Well, Google has its own set of technologies, but not all of those technologies are used by all of our customers. So in Google Cloud, not only do I get to study how Google does things, like how we build web applications, APIs, how we think about security,
Mm-hmm.
Google has this really transparent culture around technology, how it's built, how it's designed. So you can read the design docs. You can participate in our product discussions and how something should be built. If you have a better idea, typically it's fairly easy to suggest something. Bonus points if you can back it up with a prototype. So Google feels like getting your PhD in any of the topics that you want, backed by real world experience. And so the way I kind of keep myself up to date is I kind of look at the career that I want to have, the areas of impact that I want, and I kind of pick and choose various technologies. But typically, what I do is I focus on fundamentals,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Docker and Kubernetes is all the rave these days. But the truth is, there is like 80, 90% of what I learned in my Linux days, 10, 15 years prior, that still makes sense
Mm-hmm.
in the container world. So for me, the way I stay up to date is paying attention to the fundamentals. And typically, that automatically gives me a head start on anything that's quote unquote new, right? So I think a lot of times people struggle when they try to focus on their product. I'm learning Cloud Foundry, Heroku, Docker, Amazon. Like when you start to do those product names, yes, it can get overwhelming because they all feel fundamentally different.
Hmm.
But below the surface, to me, they're fundamentally the same.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. A lot of times, um, most of these new technologies is using some something that was basically built on top of something that was used before. um, like I've done some training on containers, not Kubernetes, but because I'm still new to that. I'm still trying to learn that, and I know you kind of talk. I've seen talks that you've done on Kubernetes and stuff. So when I was just doing a little background research on you, but um, yeah, I've played around with containers on the Linux side, the Ubuntu one. Have you heard of it, the canonical one? Uh, I think it's slightly different. Just those containers, LXDs, LXCs.
Yeah, so that is a base component of it, and they
Mm-hmm.
all kind of have the same fundamentals.
Yep.
Linux provides these things.
Mm-hmm.
LXC, LXD, the daemon behind that
Yep.
provides the fundamentals. Some people use Kubernetes or Nomad or ECS.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of these, but again, for me, it's the fundamentals. So
Yeah.
then when I look at, canonical, focus in that area, and then I look at Google's or Red Hat's focus in that area,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of see a lot of similarities. And now the preference becomes, oh, I like this workflow better, or
Mm-hmm.
this UI resonates with me a bit more, so I'll roll with that one.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I was trying to get to, and you explained it way better than I could. But yeah, by learning the LXDs and LXCs, when I started playing around with Docker, the fundamentals. Once I learned it over there, it kind of translated um, to understand Docker, a whole lot better than I did when I played around with that as well. So, yeah, you're right. The fundamentals are very important. Um, yeah. So. Um, it was uh let me just roll right into the next question. And this is kind of like a controversial question. You kind of already answered it. It's not really controversial, but it's just one of those questions that most people have heard. And you talked about it earlier. Degrees, certifications, or both. I just want to get your opinion on which route you would recommend someone, I guess, trying to get into it to start.
Yeah, so I mean, I know a lot of people think that there's like a choice you have to make. You can
Mm-hmm.
do any of those things at any point in your career.
Mm-hmm.
You can start off self-taught and decide to go to college. You can start off in college, but more than likely, you're going to have to keep teaching yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times early in your career, let's say you're fresh out of high school and you're deciding what you should do. For a lot of people, college used to be a safe bet, especially if you can avoid all the debt. To
Mm-hmm.
me, I think student loan debt is pretty crazy because sometimes people put too much emphasis on the school they go to versus what they're actually learning. So I think for most people, literally step back for a second, get a piece of paper and say, what type of skills do I need?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. What kind of skills do I need? And then where can I go and acquire those skills? So the earlier you have this conversation with yourself, you might start acquiring these skills at the age of 16. Maybe you're in like 10th or 11th grade and you've asked this question. You can literally go to the bookstore and start acquiring those skills, putting together your portfolio, contributing to open source projects. That's an avenue for everyone. Now, so maybe a couple of years later, you look at that list of skills that you want to acquire and you say, look, I have my software development skills. I'm pretty happy with those. I think the next level for me to get better at those skills might be to go and take an entry level job where I can learn on the job. Maybe you decide that you want to understand electrical engineering because you want to work in CPUs or silicone or GPUs or something to that nature. Then college might be the best place to get started to get some of the fundamentals. And then maybe you go work at Intel. But I think every person should just literally have a plan. These are the skills I need. Here are the places where I can acquire those skills. And then you decide, maybe there's a certification. If you say, hey, look, I want to be a Linux system administrator. I know someone who does that. I play with Linux on my spare time and I want to be a professional. Hell, I might just go and get the Linux Plus certification, start there. and
Mm-hmm.
then apply for an entry-level job doing that kind of work, and then maybe learn a bit more on the job. And if that's not sufficient, you can always go back and take either formal education, or don't forget about some of those boot camps where you can kind of ramp up on some skills in a couple of months, or less than a year.
Exactly. I agree. It's it's all about your plan, or your goals. You set those goals. So I mean, yeah, I've talked about this in the past as well. You have to set goals and then follow through with those goals and write down, all your plans and try to push for it. So to achieve that. So I agree, man. Great response. um so, since my channel is mainly about Linux, I try to, talk about it a little bit. So how important is learning Linux? I know you kind of hit on a lot of these questions already, or throughout answers already. But how important is it to know Linux, in your opinion, if you're trying to get into the IT field?
I mean, if you want a job that requires Linux, then
Uh
it's super important, right? There's a
huh.
bunch of questions in here around like AI, for example.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Um, right? Like if you're doing AI development, so what is AI development for some people? Um, most people, when they think about data,
Hmm.
you have a website, people log in, they buy stuff, and those orders that they generate, that customer, when they put in their address and their payment info, well, all that's data. And typically, you take that data and you stick it in the database. Now, if you want to be the person who keeps that website up and running, yeah, maybe it runs on Linux and you shouldn't know Linux, so you know how to deploy and keep that website running. Maybe you're on the data side. Maybe the person who wants to collect and organize that data and make it very efficient to access that data. All right. So maybe you want to look at that DBA route, where a database administrator, where you know how to design database schemas to store that data. But then you start to move higher up. So in that whole AI development, the idea is that the basic thing is to store and collect this data. And at some point, you can start to do analytics, right? So this is another field. Now you're starting to get a little bit further away from Linux. So analytics is going to be about how many customers do we have, right? That's a very basic query.
Hmm.
Where are our customers based? Are they in the South? Are they in Europe? When do they buy things? Do they buy things in the morning? Do they buy things right after our commercial airs? These are all really good analytics, right? And so you can get pretty far with analytics, because analytics can tell you, hey, this product sells a lot more than this product sells. So this is what you should be recommending to people on that website. And these are the things you should keep in stock. But
Hmm.
now let's get into this other thing around machine learning. Again, we're getting even further away from Linux now. On the machine learning side, you're typically, I'm going to summarize and try to simplify a little bit here.
Hmm.
You want to be able to predict things. So now you're going to start to create a model. And for most people, this can be complex to understand, but fundamentally, humans do this really well. If you work in Foot Locker, you know what shoes is hot
Hmm.
because you have context, right? You have a mental model in your head. You might be a sneakerhead. You know Jordan's coming out with the new Jordan whatevers, and you know people are going to buy those. So you have a mental model that allows you to predict what people will want to buy. And so machine learning really is about taking this thing that humans do really, really well. We can take data, metadata from lots of sources, the weather, where we're located, the demographics, what is sold before, and we create models in our head. So the people in the machine learning world typically are trying to do the same thing. Again, further and further away from Linux administration.
Hmm.
They're trying to do things beyond what simple data analytics can produce. So, in the machine learning side of the equation, those people are going to be more attuned to learning things like TensorFlow and Python. Those are two frameworks for producing these machine learning models. Will learning Linux help? Probably, but it may not be the number one thing
Hmm.
someone getting into machine learning is going to care about.
Yeah.
So then someone asks, what is the future of machine learning, right? So now that we're starting to have all these advanced ways of getting value out of data, right? We're going from what should we buy to what will they buy, and being able to predict these behaviors, because the more and more data that these companies and systems collect, the better we can start to get these models, tweak and tune them to where we're going to get to a degree of accuracy. So will a machine learning platform such as Tesla learn how to drive a car? Will the credit rating bureaus start to have better models to predict someone's credit worthiness versus the current way they do it?
Mm-hmm.
Or will machine learning be able to tell you that you have early signs of cancer and you should go do something about it, because now the models are so advanced, because we have so many images we've seen of various types of cancer, that we can predict things much better. So the goal here really is that the future of things like machine learning, and also to your original question about Linux, I think depending on your job, what role you want to play, and where you kind of sit at the various levels of these things, you might start to say, hey, people are starting to use Linux more and more, less over time, because these higher order systems tend to abstract away the lower levels,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you start to think about your own career planning, you really need to consider how the industry is moving. Have these things been standardized? Are there better tools for doing the same things versus the way we used to do it 10 years ago? And you may have to make some adjustments in the things that you're investing your time in learning.
Okay. So do you do you think cloud technology is more well, and I know that's kind of generalized, but um is more important to actually learn than well, you still need to understand the fundamentals, so never mind. That's it's
Well,
kind
I mean,
of
you're
kind of
making
a
a bet. You're
mm-hmm.
making a bet, right? So, for example, you could wake up out of a coma and say, "Man, I'm a really good at doing tape backups from mainframes."
Mm-hmm.
And you look around, and ain't nobody really hiring for that right now,
Not at all.
right? Right. So now you could still go learn it, right? There
Mm-hmm.
might be some jobs where people want to migrate away from that into maybe more modern day backup techniques. So you got to look at it and pay attention. You need some self awareness. Like,
Mm-hmm.
think about sports. If we want to use some sports analogies, in the NBA, the game has changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Team USA lost for the first time in what, almost 30 years,
Yeah.
because the game is different. So you got to pay attention to how things are changing, because you're making a bet. Anytime you spend learning something, you're betting that that thing will pay off either for you personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can use those skills to build things that you want to build. Or if you're in the job market, you probably want to start investing in skills that are lucrative that people want to pay you to do. So you got to make that decision. So I would say there are some jobs and companies you want to work at that are moving towards the cloud. And if that
Mm-hmm.
excites you, then maybe learning the cloud skills makes a lot of sense. But that doesn't mean that Linux is irrelevant, because sometimes you also need to learn the thing where people currently are, and
Mm-hmm.
not just the thing people are moving to, because you want to have complete knowledge when you're making these decisions. You want to
Oh yeah.
learn what the existing techniques are, a little bit about the history, and definitely where the industry is going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true. I 100% agree with that. Because with cloud technology, I mean, essentially, it's just, and I've said this on my channel a bunch of times. I kind of simplify it this way: it's just someone else's computer, and somebody I've heard other people say it as well, but it's just something running on someone else's computer.
But
Um,
let's break that down,
oh,
because some
go
people
ahead.
say that like 10 years ago, 10 years ago, that might have been true.
Uh-huh.
But if you've ever walked into one of these modern cloud data centers,
Uh-huh.
these are computers you can't buy.
Yeah.
There are underwater sea cables that are laid down by,
Oh yeah.
tugboats and monitored by submarines,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, is that just someone else's submarine?
Nah,
Like,
you're right.
most people will never be able to buy a submarine, right? Some of these cooling systems are pretty advanced.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about machine learning, these aren't just Intel and NVIDIA GPUs. Sometimes these are custom silicon chips that are designed to do things 10 to 20 times faster, because they're hyper optimized for that particular use case.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of times you got to ask yourself, at some point, technology evolves beyond what you could buy off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And I think cloud has passed that mark. Gaming consoles have passed that mark. Your phone in your pocket has passed that mark. Your camera that you buy, your digital camera, is no match. You can't go take a box and poke a hole in it like we did in elementary school and think you can compete with these 4K digital cameras that fit in your pocket. So
Mm-hmm.
I do think that, yes, you're right. Fundamentally, we're still talking about computation, but we got to remind ourselves that having a global compute farm connected by high-speed underwater sea cables
Mm-hmm.
is beyond the reach of even large enterprises who make billions of dollars.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy because you remind me of an article I read a while back, and they were talking about Microsoft testing their underwater connection. I think off the coast of Africa, something like that. You know,
Yeah, I think they had
underwater.
an underwater data center, right? So
Yeah.
they were asking themselves, there's only so much land.
Mm-hmm.
There are properties about the ocean in terms of cooling. There's a lot more ocean than probably land. So if you could figure out how to drop a container in the ocean and somehow keep it running, there's a lot of value into doing that, especially in the wake of a natural disaster or something to that effect. But again, that's what I'm saying. This stuff keeps evolving. So if you pay attention, you'll start to realize that innovation.
Yeah, it's looks like it's coming back up. So it's coming back up.
Oh, no worries.
All right, cool. I think we're back. Guys, if you can, just let me know if we're back. If you could just say something in the chat or whatever, let us know. But shout out to everybody that's here. I see a couple more people trickling in. What's up, Lowcast? Um, yeah, people are saying we were buffering a little bit. So since we back and I see my connection is good right here, I wanted to ask you about something I saw in the chat, and this was something that I wrote down as well as you know off the list of stuff that I wanted to talk about. But serverless computing. Um, I just wanted to see if you can give a shortened explanation on serverless computing and I don't know what is being used for. In my opinion, I don't know. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think with any set of innovations, we typically automate them to the point where the infrastructure disappears. So think about the internet.
Mm-hmm.
If you were one of the first early participants in the internet, more than likely, I'm talking about very early, you could imagine a world where you would have to go get a machine and run a cable and connect it directly into the rest of the network, right? That's the early days of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were not close enough to connect, then you can't be part of the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, though, you get things like Comcast and AT&T
Yeah.
and internet access, right? To the point where you don't really see wires, right? You just go and buy a cable modem, plug it into the wall, and everything behind the scenes to you is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
You don't touch it. It just seems to be there. And in that world, you would consider most people's idea of internet access is serverless. They don't think about it.
Yeah.
Same is true for email or when you do gaming, you hook up your Xbox and you play other people online. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to set up a gaming server first
Yeah.
in order to play an online game with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So in that situation, again, serverless is this kind of operational model, if you will, that's tailored to a specific set of needs. Now, some people talk about this from a product perspective, like Amazon Lambda is serverless because you can run functions and respond to events.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not really writing a server like an HTTP server or a web server. And in that case, yes, that's probably where most people have originated that paradigm. But now, when we think more generally about serverless, we really talk about compute capabilities, but the management and per use pricing model. So, what is a serverless email server? Well, Gmail would be a good example.
Mm-hmm.
What's the alternative to a serverless? It's you going to go buy a machine,
Mm-hmm.
hooking it up to the internet, and installing some email server
Yeah.
like SendMail and Spam Assassin and managing that whole thing just so you can send and receive email.
Mm-hmm.
Most people want no part of that. They're like, no, thank you. I will rather just use a serverless or a SaaS, software as a service offering.
Yeah.
So I think serverless now, as we apply it to more compute, so we're going down the tree. So instead of you learning Linux and getting a Linux server, configuring it so you can access it just so you could deploy your app and keep it running,
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing that for over 30 years. At this point, most cloud providers know how to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
what they can do now is say, look, just give us your code, give us your code in a container, and we will run it for you probably in a better way
Mm-hmm.
than you can do by just starting from scratch and trying to build all of these security layers, get the right personnel to manage all of this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is just the evolution of different parts of the technology stack. So sometimes it's just going to be running web applications. Sometimes it's just running a machine learning job, playing a video game, or even the database where you put your data. So serverless to me is this maturity of our industry that says not everyone needs to learn how to deal with low level infrastructure in order to leverage modern day computing practices.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, let me ask you this. I guess this is kind of like a personal question for me. Like, now privacy. Where does privacy fall into that? If you want to get into that, I don't know if you want to, uh, because that's one of the things I talk about, or one of the reasons, I express using Linux. You know what I'm saying, because of the privacy aspect. Where does that fall into it, if you don't mind?
Well, I would definitely say just using Linux doesn't give you
Well, yeah,
privacy,
yeah,
right?
that's
So
right.
I think things that make us feel comfortable is when we feel we have control of what people can see,
Hmm.
just at a high level. I can close my own door. I can close my window shades.
Hmm.
I can just be quiet and keep my thoughts to myself, right? This gives me a bit of privacy, right? Having the tools to close myself off from the rest of the world or to others gives me control. Now, privacy can be lost in many ways.
Oh yeah.
All right. I go open a bank account. The very nature of opening a bank account, I have to give people my information,
Hmm.
my ID, my address, my social security number. So at this point, at least the person that I've given this information to, I have to trust
Hmm.
that they're going to keep that information between us and the systems that need it. And then when the privacy gets violated, let's say without my knowing, that bank takes my information and sells it to someone who wants to send me junk mail,
Hmm.
right? So now my privacy is being compromised. Like, what did they give them?
Yeah.
Did they give them my address? Did they give them my full name? Did they give them my bank balance? Right? All of that starts to kind of violate my privacy. I don't necessarily have control on who gets access to certain information because that information could be detrimental. And we can apply the same logic to healthcare. I don't want people to know what my medical records look like,
Yeah.
right? For various
HIPAA.
reasons, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about privacy, it's a fundamental thing that humans have always had, right? We've always had this ability to control what people know about us.
Hmm.
So when it comes to technology, a lot of times we get into a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
Some systems need more information from you to be helpful. For example, if you hire a personal assistant and you say, look, the reason why I'm hiring you, I need help in my day to day. All right. I need someone that can book my flights, restaurant reservations, help me pick out what clothes to wear. In order for that person to be effective, they're going to need to learn a lot about you,
Yes. Exactly.
right? You could have them just go guess, say, hey, I saw LeBron James wearing this. Even though you're 2 feet shorter than he is, this
Hmm.
might look good on you too. Probably not. So they would need to know your height and your style. So when it comes to privacy, all of these systems that are trying to be helpful, there's this very sensitive and delicate relationship between a service provider and the consumer here. I will give you my information in trade of services that tend to benefit me.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, most people do want personalized services. They don't want search results that are irrelevant to them. They don't want to watch videos that they don't really care about. So when it comes to privacy, the thing why this is also important to any of the tech practitioners, if you're going to be a software developer, this touches on your lines of ethics. If you're collecting data from customers, are you encrypting that data?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sharing it with only the necessary systems that need to see that? Do you have roles and permissions to protect everyone from the organization from seeing stuff that they have no business seeing? As a engineer, whether you're an operator managing Linux servers or a developer writing applications, these are things you should know about, because just like you would like someone to protect your privacy, you also have that responsibility managing these systems to protect other people's privacy. So if you're doing a database backup, how about you don't do that on your laptop and leave it open while you're at Starbucks and someone then takes all of that data, and therefore you're violating the privacy of all the people who have entrusted you with it. So that's my thoughts on privacy. It's a fundamental human concern.
Mm-hmm.
We trade a bit of our privacy to limited parties in order to get something of value. And there's a trust relationship that can't be broken, or we no longer trust people with our privacy.
Mm-hmm. Cool, cool. Yeah, that's a great answer, and I understand what you're saying there. You know, um, now it was something I saw in the chat. So, and this kind of goes back to the cloud question you were answering earlier. Um, so traditional Linux admins, storage admins, what do they do in the future? And I know you kind of explained it, but I just wanted to see if you had any more you want to add. But he says join cloud providers or learn Python.
In the future, there will always be something to break, something to fix, something to work on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people say, oh, the cloud's going to take my job, right? I'm managing these 25 servers in this data center. And if my company goes to the cloud, then I'm out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a slight truth to this. If your job is buying servers and then driving them into the building and connecting them and then waiting for them to break so you can fix them, well, yes. If that is the only skill you have, you could get that job at a cloud provider or someone that provides those services. But yes, that job may not necessarily be the number one thing to bet your entire future career on, because less people want to do that. Less companies want to pay someone to do that. So, okay, now you know where you are, you know where things are going. So you say, what can I do with this skill set? But here's the truth is, once you boot up a server, you typically have to put an operating system on it.
Mm-hmm.
You typically have to keep that operating system up to date. So even in the cloud, you're going to have to do those things. And what tends to happen is most people will go to the cloud, and instead of running 25 servers, they may start to run 100, mainly because uh, it's easier to do so. They may choose to have smaller units of compute versus a whole server. Either way, now your skills are going to get another opportunity to grow, because now instead of managing 25 operating systems that need to be patched, upgraded for security vulnerabilities, and software automated to be deployed to, you may now have to do this on 100. So guess what? The We're going to need more people who know how to do that. So your skills will now graduate. So it's not a bad thing that you learn how to do those other things. It's just that the world will continue to open up and expose new opportunities. So if you're doing database backups today, maybe companies are not just going to do simple, backup and restore. They may be more interested in replication and
Mm-hmm.
data encryption. So now you can take your backup skills. When you have good backup skills, you need to learn how to store stuff cost efficiently. You may have to learn things about data compression. You
Mm-hmm.
may have to think about recovery strategies. All of those fundamentals apply to the way people think about storing data in the cloud, even if it's more about replication across multiple providers. So it's always active. So that's the way I want people to think about this, right? Maybe you have a programming language you've learned 15 years ago that you don't see people using that much anymore, like Perl. Nothing wrong with Perl, but most people aren't building brand new applications in Perl. So
Mm-hmm.
you still know how to program. Most of those fundamentals carry over. So if Go, Golang, the programming language from Google, where a lot of the tools that would have probably have been written in Perl are now probably written in Go or something different. Well, you can take your skills and say, well, I'm going to go learn this new programming language because that's the latest and greatest tool people want to use to implement this fundamental idea of programming.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad you went right into programming because I wanted to ask another question, you know, and really I was gonna ask you about Go because you brought it up earlier. That's something that I played around with in the past. I didn't fully learn it, but I am currently learning a little bit of Python. But what are some of those programming languages that you recommend for people to actually get into? And I know you should be following you know I guess the trends or the type of programming languages that are being used the most. That's kind of where you want to go, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts though. Sorry.
Yeah, when it comes to programming language, I always just tell people do not get caught up in decision paralysis where you're trying to find the one that everyone will say, hey, you picked the right programming language, right? That's not going to happen because
Yeah.
depending on who you're talking to, some people treat programming languages like religion, like literally.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my God,
I've seen the
everyone's doing everything
arguments.
in Python. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's like, so I tell most people the first language you're going to use and be successful with is the one you know how to use.
Yeah.
Just like speaking languages, right? There are lots of languages across the world. The one you typically learn first is the one that's going to help you survive,
Hmm.
communicate with your parents, communicate with the world around you. So if you're a front end developer, and you want to have a successful career doing front end development in a web browser, then you're going to learn JavaScript or
Hmm.
some popular JavaScript framework. That's just what it's going to be. If you want to do mobile apps on, Apple's iOS, then you're going to learn Swift
Swift.
or Objective C.
Hmm.
That's what it's going to be for you, regardless of what anyone says. That's the environment that you need to be successful in, so you got to learn the tools of the trade. So, and again, that's just your first language. Now, the fundamentals like for loops and functions and processing data, those fundamentals will translate to other programming languages. So I recommend to people, whatever your problem domain is, learn that language. Go
Hmm.
super deep, learn the fundamentals. And if you go to a new job, don't get to the point where you're like, oh no, I must do everything in Python because that's the one I learned first. But now you're robbing yourself because if Go or a different programming language will make you more successful, you might want to move to that other language. I'm going to give you a very concrete example. Let's say you learned Python 8 years ago or 9 years ago before Go really took off.
Hmm.
And a lot of infrastructure management tools were written in Python. So that was the right decision at that time, and you went in and you kept up to date with your Python skills. Maybe you can write Python without even trying.
Hmm.
Great. Then new tools start to come out like Terraform from HashiCorp. Terraform is a tool that allows you to automate provisioning infrastructure like Linux servers in the cloud or load balancers. And you find out that tool is written in Go. Now you could say, well, I don't really need to learn Go to use Terraform, so fair point. But maybe you want to contribute to Terraform or extend it in some way, you might want to learn Go. Docker comes out, it's written in Go. Kubernetes comes out, it's written in Go. And when you start to see the tools that you need to start using are written in a particular programming language, now you have to make this decision. Is it worth expanding my skill set so I can contribute and make an impact in that new ecosystem that's starting to form? And that's the way I think about programming languages, right? I learn them when necessary, when I can use them to accomplish something.
Okay. Yeah. That's yeah, and that's great advice. And because I mean it's all depending on what you're working on and what you're trying to I don't know accomplish. Because one thing I was gonna say, and I apologize, I'm all over the place. I'm trying to find some of the things you said like Terraform, and I just threw that in the chat. So anybody interested in it, checking that out is there. But I started I learned programming by, and most people might laugh at me, but I learned programming from using VBA, and this was all like Excel spreadsheets and also access, databases, those simple Microsoft databases, by writing VBA in the background to manipulate the data. That's how I learned the concepts of programming. As far as like what you were saying, the loops and all that stuff, and all those fundamentals translated to other programming languages. Even though that's it's a Microsoft thing, but it's still the fundamentals are there for a programming language, and that applied across the board, with whatever programming language I am. Because I mean I've gotten to the point where I can read it. I may not fully understand the programming language or what they're trying to do, but I can at least understand the concept of what they're trying to accomplish with the code just by looking at it. You know what I'm saying? And so I agree those fundamentals will transition. So just and this kind of goes back to what you said earlier, just start though. At the end of the day, just start learning a programming language, and if that's what you're interested in, and
And
once you
people
get the
should keep in mind
fundamentals, oh, go ahead.
there are hundreds and hundreds of
Oh yeah.
thousands of companies globally that are using a various collection of technologies,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you don't have to optimize what just a small few companies are doing. Everywhere on this earth, there's a company somewhere that prefers one technology stack over the other. So
Mm-hmm.
even though I usually talk about the future sometimes, the truth is not everyone's going to move at the same time. Some technologies like mainframes were supposed to be gone a long time ago. Here they are around 50, 60 years later, still up and running. And you can even buy brand new ones that do new capabilities. So, you just want to pay attention to the overall landscape. You do have a bit of a choice in the type of technologies you want to work on. But in order to have that choice, it's helpful to have a diverse set of skills so that way you can actually have some agency over your own career. Once you stop learning, you start to narrow the number of things you can do. So that's all we're really talking about now is get started, learn some skills. If you're going to be in this career for a long time, trust me, you're going to continuously doing that process from here on out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree. So that's pretty much all the questions I have for you. Let me see. I thought I seen one more thing in the chat that I thought no, the serverless thing was the last one that I saw that I wanted to ask you. If you seen any other questions that you want to respond to, well, hold on, let me see. Right, you go deep. Syntax translation. Yeah. Um.
Yeah, I covered most of the ones that I saw in
Mhm.
the chat. I think,
Mhm.
people just kind of had this. I see another one just pop up. How do you ramp up on new skills for work? Do you just go from docs to applying it on the problem domain at work, or do you try to get a ongoing side project going? So I think this question is like for a new skill at work. Typically, I'm asking like, what is this new skill required for? So let's say the team wants to bring in a new system like Redis. Redis is a tool for caching, right? So maybe we
Mhm.
have a basic 3-tier web application. We got a load balancer. We got the application itself, and we got a database. And let's say we had that for 10 years and you got really good at that, right? So you know those things like the back of your hand. Then the team is like, yo, we want to improve the website performance. And they ask you, how would you go about that? And let's just say you don't know how to do anything outside of those 3 tiers: load balancer, the application, and the database. So someone on the team is like, hey, I think we should look at Redis, right? So now you got a new problem, and someone has just introduced another product or project called Redis. Now, Redis is typically used for caching, can be used for other things, but let's just keep it super simple. So basically, your idea is like, now I got to learn about caching. Number one, fundamentally, what is caching, right? What is caching? How long has it been around? What was it designed to do? So you go do a little work and you say, caching is a way to prevent load from hitting your server or your database by storing the previous results
Mhm.
and then just serving those to people who come to visit your website.
Yeah.
So you say, all right, I got a new fundamental. So that's how I would start wrapping up on the fundamental. Redis caching. Now, what's this Redis thing? So Redis is a caching tool that people typically use. So what I would do is I'm reading blog posts, I'm watching videos, I might go buy the Redis book. I'm going to go through the Hello World Redis example. I'm going to look for why people hate Redis, why people like Redis, and I'm going to try to get as much experience I can in that first couple of weeks. I want to learn as much as I can about the pros and cons, but I am going to get a setup and then say, all right, team, I think I kind of got an idea what this thing's all about. I think I understand the fundamentals of caching, and I think Redis is a popular tool in this space. Here's what I want to try. I want to try a POC. So now we're going to try it at work, because I think work is probably one of the best places to really learn the technology, because number one, you don't need to necessarily use all of the technology, just enough for what you're trying to do. And you have the responsibility of going from a testing environment to production where it counts. So then I'm reading the docs in that production or that testing environment. I'm going to set up Redis, and then I'm going to try to figure out what does it take to configure my app to use Redis and make sure that that is actually working. So I'm going to learn how to do benchmarks to make sure that when we turn on the cache, things are actually getting faster, so we know we did it right. And then you're going to learn a lot in that testing environment, that what happens if you fill up the cache? What happens if Redis were to cache or crash? Those skills you're going to learn over time. And then as you learn more and start to push those changes to production, then over time, you'll be just as good at caching as the previous three things. So that is my formula for every new skill I want to learn. What's the fundamentals? Read up on it, pros and cons, do a few examples and POCs in my own lab environment, and then try to introduce it in a testing environment until it lands in production.
Cool. Yeah, that's great advice. And speaking of your own environment, do you this goes back to a question that someone always asks me to ask. Maddox, shout out to you, man. But he says, what does your battle station look like? Or do you use like a lot of
So my battle station is super simple. I know a lot of people got like 10 monitors and, you know what I'm saying, looking like they about to go to space or something. I'm super simple. I do most of my work on a Chromebook.
Okay.
There's a Linux shell. I pop it open and I write most of my code in Vim. Sometimes I'll use VS Code depending on what I'm doing. And I like my Linux environment. I try to keep most things simple. So for everything else, I work at a cloud provider, so that's my on-prem.
Yeah.
And so what I'll do is I'll have things like Kubernetes clusters in the cloud, virtual machines in the cloud. I do have a Mac laptop over here as well. So sometimes I'll run stuff locally on the Mac just to make sure it works on Mac as well. But I tend to have a very simple workflow. I write code using Vim for the most part. I like command line tools. So if I ever need to do like reformatting the code or running a linter to make sure that I have the right style in place, I like to just kind of go slow, push my stuff to GitHub, write pretty good docs, test my stuff in Linux. Depending on the machine I'm using, I like to do my builds in the cloud. So I'll use something like Cloud Build or GitHub Actions, do my builds there, create artifacts. And then if I'm using CI/CD for something, I'll have it pick up those artifacts and deploy to my environments. So I'm one of those people who keep it simple because I need to be able to go back and forth between my laptop on Linux, my laptop on Mac. And so I just don't really overinvest in like, one operating system over the other. Fundamental, I keep it super simple. And I go slow because I kind of like to just kind of get it right and learn while I'm doing something new.
Okay, that makes sense. So you don't have a rack at the house, huh?
No, my power
I know. I'm
bill
just
is
playing.
under control. I do have some nice like Juniper switches and Wi-Fi stuff going on.
Okay.
Have nice video and audio equipment.
Mm,
But when it comes to computing, man, these things are so fast.
yeah.
I think people get carried away. But again, I have a cheat code. I work at Google Cloud.
Yeah.
So I literally have access to the
Uh huh.
full cloud as my dev environment. So I guess I'm a bit spoiled in that regard. If I
Yeah.
didn't have access to the cloud, I would probably have a nice little tower over here to have like a VM farm to replicate as much of that as I could.
Hmm. That's cool. That's cool, man. One of the perks working for Google. But uh let's see. It was one other thing I wanted to kind of ask you. Oh, but shout out to KeepItTechie. Good to see you, man. It's always good to see you in the building. But I thought it was, yeah. This was asked earlier, and this will be the last question because I don't want to hold you too long. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how much time you got. You know what I'm saying? So let me just hit this last one. But any inter any interest in blockchain applications, or in Google, or with you, something that you're learning or whatever? Um,
Ask the question again.
any interest in blockchain applications? In
Oh,
Google, since,
blockchain.
yeah, since
Uh,
companies like IBM are adopting blockchain. That's the actual full statement he wrote.
yeah, I don't think we have a publicly available, blockchain product, and that is just not my area of expertise. Like, so when we
Okay.
talked about learning before, I learned enough about blockchain, kind of know what the technology is, what people want to use it for. You start to kind of get into some of the crypto stuff, but you also get into smart contracts. To be
Mm.
honest, I am not that interested at all in any of the blockchain stuff. Like, I choose to stay aware.
Hmm.
I, maybe have done a tutorial or two. I pay attention to the space a little bit, but I consciously put it on the shelf and
Okay.
just say, I am not going to spend too much time learning about blockchain and keeping up with it, because right now at this point, I just don't want to get good at it. I don't want to work on it. So I typically reserve that space for something else.
I got you. I got you. I got you. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way when it comes to the blockchain stuff. I haven't put much stock into learning it. You know what I'm saying? And I've researched it. I've looked into it. Done my research, but it's just something I'm not that interested in at the moment. Even though it's fascinating what they're doing with this technology, but it's just something I've never had the, I guess, reason not to make me want to go over there and play around with it or try to develop on it. But I appreciate the question. I mean the answer, but I definitely appreciate you coming through and doing this. I hopefully someone out there that's young that's trying to get into the IT field got something from this interview. You know what I'm saying? I do these interviews to try to help people that are coming behind me, um, just to, I don't know, give out information that can possibly help you, be successful in the IT field if you're trying to. But shout out to everybody that came out. Shout out to you, Kelsey. I definitely appreciate it again. And please hang on after this. I'm gonna go down and run a little outro, so I can chat with you in the background. But shout out
Awesome.
to everybody again. Oh, did you have anything else? Shout out all your social media. I apologize. Shout out all your stuff, man. Let people know where they
Oh,
want to find
I
you.
don't have much to shout out, man. Honestly, I jump on these things because I used to be this person looking for, and still am, always looking for tips and tricks on how to invest in my own career.
Hmm.
So when other people give me the opportunity to do it for somebody else, I'm going to show up to do it. So I don't have anything to sell y'all. I don't have anything for you to necessarily follow. If you do want to see me somewhere, I'm on Twitter at Kelsey Hightower on Twitter. But other than that, I just ask that you all keep learning and, invest in yourself, because I think the returns are fantastic.
Exactly. And I appreciate it again. Thank you guys for coming through, and peace.